Kight is a multi-talented speaker and composer who has helped to develop innovative leaders at hundreds of the world's most prominent organizations, ranging from the Walt Disney Company to the Swiss Economic Forum to even the Seattle Seahawks of the National Football League. Kai is a unique blend of art and science, a product of Stanford University's engineering school and a violinist who's performed at venues including the Great Wall of China. Kai believes that innovation exists at the intersection of both systems and soul. Listen closely as Kai shares insights on how to compose your own breathtaking creations.
So much. Thank you so much. Thanks so much to my friend that moved her foot out the way, so I didn't trip over you to begin. I really appreciate that. Could have been a bad start. So, the entrepreneurial mindset can take many different forms. It could be a venture that you're pitching. It could be an extracurricular activity on campus. But whatever your path may be, I invite you to ask one question. When it comes to your time here at Colby for students? Are you writing new music, or are you just playing the notes that have already been written? Now, to be a composer and to be an entrepreneur is not just to accept the ideas that someone hands to you. To be the composer is to locate and articulate your own instincts so you can put them on the page. And so to bring that to life, it's not gonna be the typical one-sided conversation of a speech. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to share 3 different ideas that I've designed specifically for your experience at Colby. And as I share these ideas, I invite you to really relate them to your own personal experience. And even notice if you have a moment of a point of tension with them. And at the end, we're gonna throw up a link to a form, and you can tell me what's on your mind. And next week, I'm gonna send you all back a video where I synthesize your ideas and share insights based on your actual thoughts and inclinations. So to get started, I wanna begin by telling you a little bit about myself. So growing up, I was the most traditional classical violinist that you could imagine. So growing up, I would play nothing but Beethoven and Brahms. So all the music that you would hear in the background of a jewelry commercial, that was me. And while others my age were doing these ridiculous things like going outside and seeing the sun, I was always getting ready for that next orchestra concert. And by a show of hands, who here has been to a live orchestra concert before? Okay, amazing. So for the 2 people that haven't, there's this very particular span of time in the beginning of the show. So what happens is, before the real music starts, the audience comes in to find their seats, and the performers on stage are just filing in, warming up, and waiting for the real music to begin. And when I was in this orchestra, this was by far my favorite part of the show, and let me tell you why. So while the performers to my left and right would be warming up to the Mozart on the stand in front of us, I would use this for a slightly different reason. So I would sit back in my chair, and off the top of my head, I would start to jam, I'd start to improvise. And I would look out into the audience, and I would pretend like everyone was there to see me. It's my private showtime. And some of the ideas I really liked. And so what I would do is I would turn the sheet music over and jot down some of my notes on the back of the page. Now, my stand partner, who was sitting right next to me, she hated every single time I would do this, but I never let her get to me because in my head, the audience was loving it, right? And so we'd be on stage making these sounds for like 5 or 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden, the lights would dim. And the whole audience would get completely silent. This meant it was time for the conductor to take the stage. And at this point, at this age, the conductor was by far the most terrifying person that I knew. And so I had to make sure not only to sit up straight, but to turn that sheet music over so he couldn't see what I was up to on the back of the page. And so he would walk towards the podium, and he would take a bow to the audience and look back at the group. And he would start to lift his hands for us to start playing the real music. And this was when I was in a predicament, because I wasn't as prepared as I could have been for the real music we came to play. But I had a plan for this. So anytime we would get to a difficult section of the music, I would do something similar to the air guitar. So I play the air violin, looking like the greatest professional out there, but without actually making a sound at all. And the air violin, it's like a skill on its own. It's kind of like synchronized diving in the Olympics, because the worst case scenario is for the music to stop and for you to just be flailing your arms on stage. But luckily that never happened, because I was pretty good at the air violin. And maybe a little too good. Because after one of these concerts, we get back to the next rehearsal, and the conductor says we need to do something called a down the line. And does anyone know what a down the line is? Okay, well, a down the line is the most intense review process, the most intense exam you can imagine. The conductor can pick anyone one by one to play. They can pick a specific part of the music and make someone play one by one in front of the entire orchestra. And on this day, of course, the conductor picked a part of the music for which I was just a master air violinist. And so we start going down the line, and it's an odd feeling to know that you're the one he's looking for from the start. We start going down the line, and now it's my stand partner's turn, which means I'm next. And she goes up to play, and it's perfect. She doesn't miss a note at all. And as she's coming back down to sit, she's just smiling at me because she knew exactly what was going to happen to me next. So now it's my turn to play, and I go up. And to be honest, I'm looking at this music for like the first time. And I start to play, and within 5 seconds, it becomes very obvious that the conductor is just not a fan of the air violin at all. So after 5 seconds, he cuts me off. And at first, I'm thankful, right, to put me out of this embarrassment. But then, before I could even sit back down, he tells me that I'm out of the orchestra. I can't play in the next concert, that I'm out. And I remember I was so busy playing the air violin, I completely became a fraction of what I knew myself to be. And so a question I have for you is, do you ever have a moment that feels like you're playing the air violin? So a few weeks ago, I had an incredible opportunity to meet with some students here on campus and just to learn about what life is like. And something I was deeply impressed by is the amount of work it took for each of you to be in this position, whether it's the grades, in high school, the extracurriculars, perhaps existing with pressure from parents. You being here, in some senses, is dependent on your ability to present yourself as perfect. But the entrepreneurial mindset, right, that experience, is dependent on a willingness to be imperfect. And so the same quality that serves you really well, the same quality that brought you here, could ironically be the same thing to not allow you to make the most of the experiences while you're here as well. And that made me think about how in life there can often be so much pressure to be seen as good, right? To be seen as competent. But in music, for the composer, moments of incompetence are actually accepted as a natural and expected part of the process. What I mean is that the composer can understand all the ideal ways that the music should go without actually knowing how to play any of the instruments at all. And this is a state of being that I like to call enlightened inadequacy. That knowing the ideal way to do things and actually being able to embody that are two different things. And so when a composer tries to play something new, it's built into the understanding that we might sound a little bit silly in the beginning. And so I invite you to find a moment. Imagine what it would look like to practice enlightened inadequacy for a moment. To try something, maybe even this weekend or next week, where it feels like you're playing something new for the first time. And to not think of this as something to master, but something to notice. Notice what you're telling yourself. Notice what you're saying about yourself. And to realize that just 2% more comfort in the zone could lead to some magnificent entrepreneurial and creative outcomes. So after I was out of this orchestra, I was naturally looking for a place to share my music. And I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in the DC area, and I found out about this competition in which the winner would have the chance to perform as a soloist at the Kennedy Center in DC. And it's one of the most sought after venues in the area. I'd always dreamt of playing there. And so I practiced for weeks and weeks, but I'll never forget the moment I walked into the site of that audition. So it felt like one of those early American Idol episodes. So the whole auditorium was empty, except for these 3 judges sitting at a table right in front of the stage. And guess who was the main judge sitting right at the table? the conductor, and I could tell he had my name on a special list off to the side. And so I'm standing in front of these three judges, and I lift my instrument to play. And I will say I was a bit more confident this time because I actually looked at the music. It helps. And I lift my instrument to play. And in that moment, the judges, all three of them, they simultaneously pull these bright red pins out of their pockets. So they had my sheet music on the table in front of them. And so anytime I'd miss a note or skip a beat, the judges would go wild and use the red pen all over. And I'm sure they had a great time doing this, right? Like, I'm sure they went out and cheered to the hopes and dreams of mine that they crushed that morning. But as the performer, I couldn't wait to get out of there. And so I hit the last note. I got no applause. And I left the building expecting to never hear from them again. So a few days passed, and it's time for them to announce the winners. And I think they got together and collectively decided on the most stress-inducing way to do that. So they didn't call a single person. They didn't email anyone. They made everyone come back to the site of the audition and find their name on this tiny little list up on a wall. And I remember getting there a little bit late, and so I had to weave my way through the crowd a bit. But when I got to the front, I couldn't believe it. But for the first time in my life, my name was on top of that list. I won. And I knew the conductor had written my name because it was in that same red ink as before. You see, the red pen, it didn't mean that my music was hopeless. The red pen was a direct path for it to grow and become something greater. And so a second question I have for each of you is, how do you use your red pen? So for the students and the conversations I had with some of your peers before, it was really interesting to learn about how some of the paths that seem traditional and safe may not feel that way anymore. So whether it's funding cuts or research cuts or grad school acceptances being revoked, things that felt certain may not be that way, whether you're building a venture or following a more traditional path. And so how you use that red pen on yourself in these moments of uncertainty could have really large effects on your future and the path you create for yourself. And that made me think about how in life, in moments of uncertainty, there's often a tendency to want to project a sense of calmness, I guess that everything's okay. But in music, it's actually the anxiety of the composer that creates peace for the rest of the ensemble. So before the performers get their part to play, it's the composer's job to think about all the notes in the future that could go wrong. And this ability to imagine and solve problems that don't actually exist yet is what allows for a smooth path to exist in the future. And so calmness isn't a feeling to portray. It's the byproduct of deeply understanding all the possibilities that could go awry. You know, so often, I'll give an example for myself. Like this morning, I woke up and I was really nervous for what I'm doing right now, really nervous for this speech. And I told a friend, and they were surprised because I've been doing this for more than a decade. And what I noticed is that there's this subconscious belief that if we're proficient enough, if we're prepared enough, then we should graduate past the feeling of anxiety. Right? And so when we're in a high stakes moment, we start to feel all of that. We have no choice but to interpret it as a sign of a lack of readiness, when it actually could be the opposite, right? And I think about so often how we idolize this idea of thinking free like a child, like having no worries and thinking free. But if that child isn't accompanied by a really anxious adult or older sibling, it might wander into the street. And so calmness in the wrong scenario is actually a direct path to danger. And that's the next concept, which I call catastrophic calmness. It's moments when what looks like confidence is actually just an inability to be aware of the realities that deeply affect us. And so right now, as you're charting out your future, there are some realities, perhaps beyond your control, that could deeply affect the path you're carving for yourself. And so I invite you to not project a feeling of calmness, but to earn that calmness by dissecting and using that red pen to think about scenarios in the future, and also using resources around you, such as the Halloran Lab, so that you don't have to do that alone. So after I found out that I won that competition, I felt like I was on top of the world, right? But that feeling only lasted for about 20 minutes, because that's when I realized that now I actually had to perform in front of hundreds of people at the Kennedy Center. And classical music is one of those fields where there's a right way to play, there's a wrong way to play. And everyone on stage was gonna know all the notes that I was supposed to play correctly. And so I went home and I circled the calendar, I circled the date on my calendar, and I dedicated this to being the most perfect performance of my life. So I locked myself in a practice room for weeks, and it started to pay off. Like after weeks of locking myself in this practice room, I could play this piece of music forwards or backwards, any direction, I had it down. And so the actual performance was on a Sunday afternoon. And I remember that morning, I woke up extra early to run through the piece a few times. And as I started to run through the piece, I kept getting stuck on the bottom of the first page. So on the bottom of the first page, there were these technically difficult notes, these 60 notes on the bottom of the first page that I just couldn't get them. They were working before, but for some reason on that day, my hands just wouldn't move in the same way. And so I kept trying, but nothing would happen. But the clock was ticking away. And so I had to head off to the venue. And when I got there, they put me in one of those stress-inducing dressing rooms. So the ones with the bright fluorescent lights and the mirrors on all four sides to let you know the pressure's on you right now. And I'm back there trying to go over these 60 notes. And then I see a program for the concert on the other side of the room. And it stood out to me because my name wasn't on it at all. And at first I was kind of offended, right? I'm the soloist. But then I realized that maybe this is my chance to get out the emergency exit before anyone could realize. Now, before I could do that, they called my name on the speaker above, which meant it was time for me to take my place behind the curtains. And I don't know if you've stood behind the curtains before. We'll pretend like those are curtains. I don't know if you've stood behind the curtains before, but it's terrifying, because no one can see you yet, but you can see every single person that's filing in. And so I was back there going over these 60 notes, and then all of a sudden, the lights started to dim, and the audience got completely silent. It was time to take the stage. And when I walked out there, I couldn't see a thing. I couldn't see the people behind me on stage. I couldn't see the amazing architecture of the room that I was in. The only thing I could see were those 60 notes on the bottom of the first page. And so we started at the top. And to be honest, it sounded good at the beginning, but have you ever had one of those feelings where your mind is just disconnected from your body? Like, my fingers were moving the right way, but my mind just knew that this was not going to end well at all. And unfortunately, my mind was right, because when I got to the bottom of the first page, my hand was so frozen with chills that it just slipped off the instrument, and I missed all 60 of those notes. And I had about 10 more minutes of music on stage. I was just beating myself up the whole time. Now, afterwards, there was a reception, and people were taking photos, having drinks, having a good time. And I remember walking through, using my violin case as this shield to block any kind of human contact whatsoever. But in my haste to get out of there, something happened that I'll never forget. So I was walking through, and I felt this touch on my arm. And I looked back, and it was a woman I'd never met before in my life, a complete stranger. And I was just waiting for her to say something about those notes, because I know she heard them. But she didn't say a word. She just started singing this melody, this slow melody that I'd happened to play on stage. And then she just said, "Thank you." And then she walked away. I remember I was so lost in the notes, or more specifically, I was so lost in how the ensemble around me was going to perceive me that I completely lost sight of the greater value outside of that I could offer to others. As I was preparing to come here, one thing that I kept hearing about, learning about, was how for students here, a lot of students stick to their ensemble, right? Stick to a certain group from freshman year on. And it made me think about how who we surround ourselves with deeply affects how we perceive ourselves and the value that we could add in the world. In music, a composer's job is to create a path for the future based on how they perceive the skills of the performers around them. The composer knows that how a performer looks in a certain group is very different from what that performer is fully capable of. So for example, a cello, if they play next to a violinist, they're going to appear like this low, deep, rich tone. Or if that same cellist plays next to a stand-up double bass player, they're going to appear like this high singing voice. Right? And this is what I like to call situational identities. It's that different ensembles, different groups, they bring out different parts of ourselves. Like, for example, there was a few years ago, I was working on two businesses at once. And for one of them, my partner was way more logistical than I am. So next to them, I was perceived as this like flowing artist in the wind, right? But in the other project, my partner was way more intuitive and creative than I am. And so next to them, I was perceived like this administrative logistics person, and people would ask me to do their taxes. Now, different groups bring out different parts of ourselves. And so the cost of only playing in one ensemble is not that we don't know other people. The cost of it is that we may not actually know ourselves, because it can directly limit the skills and characteristics we're able to perceive within ourselves. For all the students here specifically, whether it's a venture that you're creating, whether it's a project on campus, whether it's a future career path, you're at a moment when you are creating a path based on the qualities you see yourself as having. And so I want you to think for a moment, what are those qualities for yourself? Like, how would you describe yourself? Maybe it's logistical. Maybe for some people, they might describe themselves as lazy. And I want you to ask, is that really the totality of who you are? Or could that just be how you compare to the three people around you? So I invite you to explore the ensembles that you're around. And perhaps this weekend, perhaps later this evening, perhaps a reception after this, to explore what it feels like to interact with someone in a different ensemble. And not from a kumbaya, let's all get along perspective, but from a really an introspective way, right? To notice what happens to you that's different, what parts come out of yourself that may not come out otherwise. So often we think about finding ourselves as this very individualistic thing, but the beauty of harmonizing with those outside of the ensemble is that we can realize that the self, who we are, is actually way more expansive and powerful than what we could find on our own. And so with that thought, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for bringing me into your ensemble for even just a few minutes. And I'd like to put up this link here. So there's a QR code and a form, and you can spend a couple minutes now. Just any thoughts, ideas? It's going to be up until midnight tonight, so there's no rush if you don't get all the ideas right now. But really, let me know what you think. Let me know if this relates to something that you're working on. Let me know if there was a point of tension that you felt that you had a question about. And I'd love to organize the thoughts, and next week I'll send you all back a video synthesizing your thoughts with some fresh insights. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of this, and please enjoy the rest of the evening and all the pitches. So thank you so much.